Video games. The greatest part of entertainment industry. Various sources claims that if we combine both film and music industry, they will not catch the value of video games. Video games, similar to other human arts, are the way to express ourselves, enhance the imagination, allow us to create our visions, stories or dreams. They also give us emotions like fear, sadness, love, taste of victory or defeat. They push our limits and create amazing experiences. And also, they connect society, cooperate with other arts, find new friends, and share the moments with others. Video games are here with us more than 7 decades, and throughout the time there was many mistakes, technological flaws, but also improvements, impacts, and evolution. This is the brief history of video games, where we experience the evolution of what many people love around the world.
If we use the simplest division of video games history, we can simply divide games into two blocks which are divided by the year of 1972. In 1972, the video game industry was essentially founded on purpose of not only on showcase technological prowess, but mainly for entertainment reasons, which games serves up to this day. During that year, the first company pure designed for creating video games was created under the name of Atari, which also heavily pioneered video game arcade systems. On the other side, thanks to the influence and putting money of technological company called Magnavox, the first commercial video game console Magnavox Odyssey was also released. Both of these companies played a key role to increasing the gaming influence, knowledge, technology, and soon more companies became interested into a new emerging section of entertainment market. But all what happened before 1972 was quite different in terms of how we define or consider as a video game. That's why if we put in question what was the first video game ever, there is no clear answer despite having several candidates for the title. The creation of first episode was not an easy task, simply due scarce of information and lack of sources which I can gather from. It's a massive difference between referring about the first years of video games or doing similar thing with something more modern. Despite the limitations for creating this episode, I will try to make a video as close to the original sources as it possibly be. If you want to explore more, I will put some reference links down below the video. Also, I will put some timestamps in the description for better navigation. Otherwise, let's kick off this video with covering the primordial soup of gaming history, or as I call it that period, technology above entertainment. Computers or tools used for computing existed way longer than many people think. Because video games are essentially a computer programs, or in early years also has been evolved from simulations, we must briefly touch the evolution of computer technology before we reach the starting point of mapping the video game's history. The ability to count, visualize and note the numbers are something which divide us from other organisms in same way like tools crafting, culture, science, society, structures and so on. When our development reaches the point tools crafting and more advanced understanding, men created first computing tools. Tools like tally sticks, counting rods or later calculus like clay spheres or cones were just the beginning. With development of agriculture and later first city-states, counting devices improved into abacus, which was quite useful for counting livestock, harvest or taxes. Quite interesting from ancient period is the Antikythera mechanism, around 100 before Christ, which is generally considered as the first analog computer. That mechanism is still even today unfold with many questions, because devices of similar complexity not appeared until 14th century. Many mechanical aids to calculate and measure were constructed later, like the astrolabe in 1st or 2nd century or a planisphere in early 11th century. Both of these tools received several improvements during medieval age. During late Renaissance, a sector used for solving problems like proportion, trigonometry, multiplication or cube roots has been invented. During 17th century, in England a mathematician named William Aldred invented a slide rule. Some sort of mechanical programming has been saw in 1770s by a Swiss watchmaker Pierre Jacques Droz, who created a mechanical doll that could write holding a quill pen. The first true computer was invented in 1822 by an English mechanical engineer, Charles Babbage. The input of programs or data has been provided via punch cards, which has been used earlier for mechanical looms. For over a century after, analog computers ruled the technology with minor or bigger improvements. Their peak reached in 1930s when Vannevar Bush and MIT constructed a differential analyzer. Also, they played a vital role during Second World War, especially with decrypting machines and invention of early radar systems. However, during Second World War, the slow approach of better, this time digital computers, put a nail into the coffin of analog systems. Some of these remained during 1950s for specialized applications and education. Digital computers, or originally electromechanical, put their foundation by Claude Shannon's thesis in 1937 about digital computing. A year later, the US Navy developed the Torpedo Data Computer, which was a hybrid between analog and newly founded electromechanical systems. Very quickly during Second World War, the electromechanical variations slowly has been diminished by vacuum tubes and later with electronic circuits, which provided faster speed, more automatic working, and less mechanical reliance. Also, the first concepts of modern computers has been proposed by Alan Turing in 1936. His ideas has been pushed after Second World War. Note to add in this period is that influence of German engineering and especially work of Konrad Zuse with his computers Z2 in 1939 and Z3 in 1941, which was the first electromechanical programmable and fully digital computer, put some technological rivalry outside the war machinery. Zuse's work continued even after Second World War, and in 1950 Z4 computer became world's first commercial computer. Outside Zuse's work, the creation of British Colossus in 1943 helped Britain to break the cipher systems of Germans' Enigma. While Z3 computer was first electromechanical programmable computer, Colossus took the world first in electronic digital sphere. After Second World War, Turing thesis and works has been finally utilized. United States introduced electronic programmable computer ENIAC in 1945 and started to take the upper hand in computer technology. Note to add that first stored computer, which was also studied and proposed by Turing ideas, came in 1948 in United Kingdom as a Manchester baby computer. Soon the more practically utilized computers arrived, and with the invention of transistor in 1948, which in mid-1950s slowly overran the vacuum tubes technology, and started the second generation of computers. Computer technology made massive change during the following decades, especially with invention of integrated circuit in 1959, but for the building the basis and understanding the early video game history, I will stop at the end of 1940s, where the journey begins. Before we start speaking about first attempts, it's also important to add two extra notes. While we cover the development of computers on majority hardware-wise part, we must also speak about the visual part. During years, the visualization of computer working was quite wide, mostly on teleprinters or oscilloscopes. CRT or cathode-ray tubes played also a key role into visualization of the computers and televisions. While first CRT attempts are dated to the end of 19th century, for our mapping of video games history is important one thing, which some historians name this as the first video game ever, while it was just mostly a concept. In 1947, Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr. and Esther Rayman created cathode-ray tube Amusement device for an interactive electronic game, described as a device that would simulate an artillery shell arcing towards the target or CRT screen. The gaming device was never manufactured or marketed to the public, and so had no effect on the future video game industry. Under many definitions, the device is not considered as a video game, as while it had an electronic display, it did not run on a computing device. Therefore, despite its relevance to the early history of video games, it is not generally considered as a candidate for the title of the first video game. And lastly, how we define the video game. This will help us to finally understand why early attempts are quite different and why it's quite difficult to say what game was the first. The general and current definition of a video game considers some key parts. Video game has a graphical output controlled by input source like keyboard, mouse, gamepad, operates on electronic system, have interactive parts, rules, gaming mechanics, and has generally an entertainment value. While original definition used between the end of 1940s till 1970 has been limited, video games were suited for technological demonstration and computer capability, they were experimentally interactive with limited visuals, and there was no distinction between simulation, game, and experiment. That's the difference which is divided on video games history, and why year 1972 is literally a game changer on understanding of video games. That's why I called period of 1950s, 1960s and early 1970s as a period of technology above entertainment and could be logically accurate from a general perspective. However, it would be quite unfair to not cover these wild times of technological showcase and experimentation, because some of these attempts influence the future games. So after a long introduction, let's start to map all of the attempts and experiments. First on the list, we have Bertie the Brain. Bertie the Brain was a tic-tac-toe game built by Canadian engineer Dr. Joseph Cates in 1950 as a part of a demonstration of his invention of the addition troop at Canadian National Exhibition. This 4-meter large monstrosity has been designed to consist a lighted display to show tic-tac-toe board, option to choose of the difficulty, and having a console with buttons to input players' move. Computer responded instantly, which shows an impressive computational speed for its time. The showcase of Bertie was temporary, and after exhibition it was dismantled and never seen again. Trend that will set for most of the video game attempts after. A year later, the British company Fernati assembled a Nimrod computer, which was the first computer specifically designed to play a game. However, his showing at Festival of Britain, which was a showcase of British achievements and actual trends in science, technology and culture, was primarily technological and demonstrative the capabilities of digital computing. The reason of creation of NIM-based game was simply mathematically practical and good for showcase logic-based computing. Next up, we have EXO. Developed in 1952 by Alexander Shafto Douglas, EXO is generally considered as the first video game with visual display. Written for ETSAC computer, which had 3 small CRT screens, player can play a game of tic-tac-toe against artificial intelligence. The player entered their input by using a rotary telephone controller, selecting of 9 squares of the board they wish to move next. Similar to other games, it was not available to the general public. The only way was with a special permission on University of Cambridge's mathematical laboratory where the computer was built. Similar to Bertie and EXO, in same year another game around checkers or tic-tac-toe was created by Christopher Strachey for computers Pilot Ace and Fernati Mark I. Difference between other games at the moment was that this game was suited more for general purpose computers and not on dedicated ones. Plus, checkers played a quite pivotal role in machine learning systems. Following in 1958, William Higginbotham designed a sports video game named Tennis for Two, also known as computer tennis. This game has been displayed at the Brookhaven National Laboratory Annual Public Exhibition for 3 days. Tennis for Two is generally acknowledged as the first video game purely designed for entertainment than for the technological showcase. The game was displayed on an oscilloscope and played with 2 custom-made aluminum controllers. The game environment was rendered as a horizontal line representing the tennis court and a short vertical line in the center representing the tennis net as a viewed edge on. The first player would press the button on their controller to send the ball a point of light over a net, and it would either hit the net, reach the other side of the court, or fly out of the bounds. The second player could then hit the ball back with their controller while it was on their side, either before or after it bounced onto the ground. This game received a quite large interest during exhibition, and hundreds of visitors lined up to play this new game during his debut. While Tennis for Two did not inspire later designers, however, it did gain a new notoriety in the 1970s when lawyers for arcade companies defending against the patent lawsuit brought by Magnavox discovered the existence of the game and unsuccessfully attempted to portray it as an example of a prior art that invalidated Ralph Baer's television gaming patents. Higginbotham was called to testify on multiple occasions during various patent suits that continued into 1980s, which is one reason of the game is far better documented than most of the contemporaries. The game also received public recognition after Creative Computing ran a feature devoted to it in October 1982 because the magazine's editor David All had actually played the game at Brookhaven back in 1958. As a result of this article, Tennis for Two was considered the first computer game, and more in-depth research in the late 2000s uncovered some of the earlier games listed previously, and the early monographs such as Phoenix, High Score, and The Ultimate History of Video Games accord the game pioneering status. Even though new works like Replay and All Your Base Are Belong to Us acknowledge the earlier programs, however, they continue to give Tennis for Two pride of place in the early history of video games, due to arguably being the first pure entertainment product created on computer. 4 years later, in 1962, another quite impactful video game has been developed by Steve Russell. This game, named SpaceWar, is generally respected as the most influential of the early period of video games history and heavily inspired many developers in next following years. Also, the game claims the world first as being the first known video game that has been played at the multiple computer installations. The game features two spaceships, the Needle and the Wedge, engaged in a dogfight while maneuvering in the gravity well of a star. Both ships are controlled by human players. Each ship has limited weaponry and fuel for maneuvering, and the ships remain in motion even when the player is not accelerating. Flying near the star to provide a gravity assist was a common tactic. Ships are destroyed when they collide with a torpedo, the star, or each other. At any time, the player can engage a hyperspace feature to move to a new and random location on the screen. Though in some versions, each use has an increasing chance of destroying the ship instead. The game was initially controlled with switches on the PDP-1, though Bob Saunders built an early gamepad to reduce the difficulty and awkwardness of controlling the game. As mentioned earlier, SpaceWar put a massive mark on popularization and influenced small programming community at the time. Thanks for being generally accessible to the public through public domain or accessing the source code by contacting Russell, this game got a wide recognition even despite not being attempted to be sold commercially. Several future games were massively inspired by SpaceWar, like Galaxy Game or Computer Space, which both were the closing steps for the creation of the video game industry. Additionally, SpaceWar has been declared one of 10 most impactful video games of all time and inducted into World Video Game Hall of Fame in 2018. Also, SpaceWar is responsible for creating competitive gaming, which in modern years has been turned into esport. 10 years after release, a magazine, Rolling Stone, held a competition at Stanford University named Intergalactic SpaceWar Olympics. Around 20 competitors played in 3 events of 5 players free-for-all, team competition, 2 vs 2 and singles competition. Winners receive a year-long free subscription of the Rolling Stone, and the whole event has been quite well mapped by the magazine. If you want to read more about the first gaming competition in history, a link will be put in description. Similar to Nimrod, Marienbad from 1962 was a Polish puzzle mainframe game created by Witold Pogorsky, showing a variation of NIM game for Odra 1003 computer. In NIM, players take turns removing at least one object from a set of objects, traditionally matchsticks, with the goal of either being or not being the player who removes the last object. Name Marienbad was inspired from being used in movie Last Year at Marienbad from 1961. However, the game fell into obscurity with no documentation or pictures to recreate its original form, as there is only one known Odra 1003 computer remaining. At the end of the 1950s, first business schools with computer availability started to make a simple business and management simulation games to simulate economical situations. In following years, a growing interest into computers as an educational element has been increased. Most noticeable research project in this field was a cooperation between Board of the Cooperative Educational Services, shortly BOSIS, and IBM from 1963 to 1967. After first weeks of proposals from several teachers, leaders of the project, Bruce Moncrief, James Dinan from IBM, and Dr. Richard Wing from BOSIS, approved a proposal from Maidla Addis, 4th grade teacher. She proposed an idea of economical model of civilization to learn basic economical theory. While she wrote and designed of the game with assistance of programmer William McKay, Sumerian Game has been released in 1964. The game, set around 35,000 years before Christ, has players act as the 3 successive rulers of the city of Lagash in Sumer as over 3 segments of increasingly complex economical simulation. 2 versions of the game were created, both intended for play by a classroom of students with a single person inputting commands into teleprinter, which would output responses from the mainframe computer. The second version had a stronger narrative component with in-game texts and taped audio lectures, presented the discussions of the ruler's court of advisors, corresponded with images on a slide projector. First segment of the game, player played a series of rounds in which they are given about the current population, acres of farmland, numbers of farmers, grain harvested that round and stored grain. Rounds represents here seasons, and player selects how much grain will be used as a food, seed for planting and storage. After making their selections, the game calculates the effect of the player's choice on the population for the next round. Additionally, after each round, the game selects whether to report several events like being struck with a random disaster, for example fire, flooding for population, harvest, and rot or rats for storing grain. Game may also report a technological innovation which had a positive effect on subsequent rounds, reducing the amount of grain that may spoil or reducing number of farmers needed for each acre of land. Several of these innovations require the player to have first exhibit some good judgment, like feeding adequately the population for multiple rounds. In the second and third segments of the game, the city's population and grain are adjusted to preset levels, regardless of the player's performance in the prior segment, which represented some past time since the decisions of the ruler. In second segment, player can also apply workers towards the development of several crafts, which in turn can result into innovations, where the third segment increases the complexity of the simulation by adding trade and expansion choices. Impact of Sumerian Game was quite big for few reasons. Firstly, it made success of the cooperation between BOSSes and IBM and helped to increase the fundings and allow the further developments of new projects. Secondly, it inspired other developers to make a clone of this game for different computers over several years, like King of Sumeria or later as Hamurabi, and lastly it helped to popularize the computer scene with articles of famous magazines like Life or Time. Also, this game made some firsts. Madel Abyss became as the first video game writer, albeit as the first female video game designer. Game was also first with narratives and cutscene. And lastly, it became a prototype for strategic games and especially city builders later on. Despite the original source code has been lost, project slides and 3 printouts of the individual game sessions were found in 2012. Also thanks of the historian Andrea Conato, the closest possible recreation of this game has been made in 2024 and it's available on Steam. Hamurabi is a text-based strategy video game of land and resource management. It was first developed under the name of King of Sumeria or the Sumer Game by Doug Diamond in 1968 at Digital Equipment Corporation. During 10 rounds, players manage resources like people, acres of land, and bushes of grain. These resources can be used for making farms and setting amount of farmers from population. Additionally, player must deal with a plague or selling or buying the land for neighbors for exchange their grain. Game ends after 10 rounds or less if population of whole city dies or at least 45% of people starve in single round. The game was heavily inspired by Sumerian Game, which was released 4 years earlier. In 1969, Ken Thompson created a simulation video game called Space Travel, which simulated the travel through solar system. The player flies their ship around a 2-dimensional scale model of solar system with no objectives other than to attempt to land on various planets and moons. The player can move and turn the ship and adjust the overall speed by adjusting the scale of the simulation. The ship is affected by the single strongest gravitational pull of the astronomical bodies. Not to add is that during development and porting the game from computer GE635 to PDP-7, Thompson created a core for later operating system called Unix, which will become one of the most impactful systems thanks to its accessibility, simplifying some programming mechanisms, and influence into later developing Internet. Moon landing, one of the greatest achievements of mankind. Achievement that influenced whole society, art, music, and many more. And this influence also occurred in video games. Lunar Landers were a whole genre of video games based on the success of the moon landing. First appearance was shown at the end of 1969 and continued over a decade, where with more developed systems became quite popular, especially for home console systems at the end of 1970s or early 1980s. So in this part I will make an exception from the theme of this episode, which covers the video game prehistory, because the genre was one of the setting stones for a forming new industry. Original Lunar Lander Game from 1969 was a text-based game published later under many names. It was originally written in the vocal programming language for DAC PDP-8 minicomputer by James Storer during his studies at Lexington High School in the fall of 1969. His work was later uploaded into system library as a rocket after Christmas break. His computer teacher submitted the game under the name of Focal Lunar Landing Simulation, or shortly Apollo, to the DAC users newsletter, which helped to distribute the source code as a shortly named Apollo. Very quickly few versions of the game has been later submitted, like Apollo 2 or Apollo 12, and sparked another wave of new versions and game attempts. Text-based games and versions require the player to control a rocket attempting to land on the moon by entering instructions to the rocket in a turn-based system in response to the textual summary of its current position and velocity relative to the ground. In original version, players controlled only the amount of vertical thrust to apply based on their current vertical velocity and remaining fuel, which was represented by rounds. Each round meant 10 seconds of travel time. Rocket version added a simple text-based graphical display of the distance from the ground in each round. LEM version, made in BASIC, added horizontal velocity and the ability to apply thrust at an angle. Thanks to the work and influence of DSC employee and editor of the newsletter David H. All, who converted two early mainframe games, Lunar and Hamurabi, from vocal to BASIC language, partially as a demonstration for PDP-8 minicomputer, these games became a starting point for another submissions and growing small but niche popularity for this type of game programming. His work will be later heavily impactful for emerging new industry and computer games as a 101 basic computer games in 1973. In 1973, DAC tried to push popular Lunar Lander from text-based into graphical and real-time version as a part of demonstration of new graphical system GT40, linked into PDP-10 or PDP-11 computers. This version, called Moonlander, was made by Jack Burness, DAC consultant and former employee. From the text-based and turn-based game into real-time and graphical version, which also had several new features. However, now, if player miscalculate the telemetry data which game provides, module will either fly away into orbit or crash onto Moon's surface. Control of the game was not based on texting the input, but using a light pen onto a vector display graphics system. Pen allowed adjusting the throttle and angle of the module. Moonlander has some few firsts in video game history. Firstly, it's a first multiple perspective game, which means that if lander is closer to the moon's surface, view changes to a close-up view of the surface and the lander. If a landing of the lander was successful, a small astronaut will climb out from the lander and stands onto surface. That means that Moonlander was also first game which introduced a human depiction in a video game, and whole sequence is also considered as a first video game cutscene. Additionally, Moonlander was the first video game involving an Easter egg. If the player flies their ship horizontally enough in a close-up view, they encounter a McDonald's restaurant, which the astronaut will visit upon a landing and which the player can destroy by crashing the lander into it. Several versions of Moonlander has been made over time. Also in 2013 Paradigm Systems made the port for iPad. Another version, and also the most known one, is the 1971 called Lunar Lander and made by Atari. It used monochrome vector graphics and allows to rotate the ship right or left and fire thrusters via proportional throttle control system using a joystick with a spring. Like Moonlander, both graphical display of a repeating mountainous surface as well as a text readout of the ship's speed, altitude and remaining fuel are displayed. Game ends not by time limited run out, but one player runs out of fuel. Amount of fuel can be added by inserting quarters. Bonus points are awarded also for landing on difficult parts of the map. Lunar Lander was Atari's first vector graphics game and inspired by the release of the game called SpaceWar in 1977. Despite solid success, it was quickly overwhelmed by another Atari game, Asteroids, released later in same year. Influence of such a massive technological feat like moon landing put a massive mark on the first emerging games. However, the fascination of space was pivotal in other impactful medias like movies and television. At the end of 1960s, the release of the sci-fi classics about the space and traveling, like 2001 Space Odyssey or Planet of the Apes, both released in 1968, became a staple mark in this genre before the blockbuster hit Star Wars came 9 years later and put another shift.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Speaking of stars, in this period another well-known, in this way TV project came alive and became a massive cult over the time with many series, spin-offs, books, games, comics, toys, full movies and so on. This thing is called Star Trek, which firstly has been aired on 8th of November 1966, and despite slow or moderate reception at the start, it became slowly the biggest cult show in history, which is still active today by many fans, cosplays, and also heavily influenced other big movies or series projects by many references, parodies, and so on. That of course means that even Star Trek got own game in early prehistoric years of video games. It is not obviously an original direct idea from creators or people work around the series, like we saw in 1980s as some sort of addition to the movies and as a way to promote it, but technically this is still a first attempt for a video game adaptation of a movie or a series. Mike Mayfield created a text-based video game based on Star Trek in 1971. Player here controls the USS Enterprise starship and flies through galaxy to hunt Klingon ships. Player gets all necessary information like fuel, shields, energy supply, which helps him to finish mission. And lastly on our list, I must also mention one of the most popular and common board games which were also inputted into the testing of computers and also for creation of the earliest video games. The most well-known example is a chess program called TuroChamp. TuroChamp is a chess program developed by Alan Turing and David Champernowne in 1948. It was created as a part of a research by the pair into computer science and machine learning. TuroChamp is capable of playing an entire chess game against a human player at a low level of play by calculating all potential moves and all potential player moves in response, as well as some further moves it deems considerable. TuroChamp is the early known computer game to enter development. but was never completed by Turing and Chamberlain, as its algorithm was too complex to be run by early computers of the time, such as automatic computing engine. Turing attempted to convert the program into executable code for the 1951 Ferranti Mark I computer in Manchester, but was unable to do so. Turing played a match against computer scientist Elige Glennie using the program in summer of 1952, executing it manually step by step, but by his death in 1954 had still been unable to run the program on an actual computer. Chamberlain did not continue the project, and the original program was not preserved. Despite never being run on a computer, the program is both a candidate for the first chess program and video game. Several other chess programs were designed or proposed around the same time, including another one which Turing unsuccessfully tried to run on the Ferranti Mark I. Chess, the first successful chess program, was also developed for the Mark I in 1951 and took direct inspiration from Turochamp, but was only capable of solving mate-in-two problems. A recreation of Turochamp was constructed in 2012 for Centenary Conference. This version was used in a match with a chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov, who gave a keynote at the conference. Also, throughout the history, another several chess programs and games has been developed and created, like for example Los Alamos Chess in 1956, Kotek McCarthy 1962, MagHack, Kaisa, Blitz, or a recreation of chess from 1970. And that's all from this video. In this episode we try to cover all of the first attempts to create a video game from the end of 1940s to early 1970s. I did not mention two games which are on the end of this period, the Computer Space and Galaxy game, which I will use for the next episode. The reason why is that both of these games are important for the creation of some sort of primordial soup before the gaming industry has been created in 1972. So I will keep both of these games for the next episode because it will be important to introduce how that gaming industry was actually created. If you like this episode, you can put a like on this video, subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much and have a nice day. Peace!